Daily Detroit is brought to you by the community. Support our work at patreon.com/dailydetroit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to your Daily Detroit, sharing what to know and where to go in Southeast Michigan. And I don't know if you can hear the difference, but we are back in the friendly confines of our studio at TechTown in beautiful Midtown, Michigan. I am Jer Stays. To the right of me is none other than Norris Howard. We're going to be talking about the east side of Detroit today. Are you okay with that, sir?
Listen, I'm going to have to be, but it's the city of Detroit no matter what, so I'm excited.
Well, and to the left of me is our honored guest, Mark Reynolds, the chairperson of the 2024 Indian Village Home Tour, and we're going to be talking about one of my favorite neighborhoods and a neighborhood close to my heart. Mark, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Thank you. Appreciate your having me.
Absolutely. Look, so I grew up around that area. I've got so much love for it. But why did you decide to not only move to Indian Village, but get so involved in it?
Well, when I wound up coming to Michigan for work, I lived in a suburb, but it wasn't much fun. And a friend of mine was a lifelong Detroiter, lived in the villages. And all of a sudden, I'm invited out to dinner at people's homes or to cocktails and whatever. I'm spending much more time in Indian Village than I am where I live. So I figured, well, let's shorten the commute. And I bought an old house, and there we go.
Well, this neighborhood is such an allure and such a history. Kind of how did Indian Village come together?
Indian Village, actually, the property started out as a ribbon farm, like a lot of riverfront property in Detroit. Then it became a horse racing track when horse racing was apparently the fad of the late 1800s. And then the track, for whatever reason, closed, and the property owner, Mr. Owens, wanted to do something else with it. So he platted a neighborhood of first-class homes. You had to get permission of the owner of the property to build the house. They had to cost at least $5,000. So it was designed from the start to be a high-end neighborhood, and it's been that. It's got history of the movers and shakers in Detroit, especially in the teens and 20s, people like Edsel Ford or Hudson family people, the head of Packard Motor Car Company, all lived in Indian Village. It was somewhat of a more fashionable mover and shaker place at that point, and people built some really, really nice houses.
So I just want to hop in and say, adjusted for inflation, I just pulled up my inflation calculator here. It only goes back as far as 1913, so that just gives you some context. But $5,000 would be $158,000 now. So even still, those homes are way more valuable even now than what they would be just adjusted for inflation.
Well, if you figure that, say in 1910, you could buy a new Ford Model T for about $600, that might give that $5,000 figure a little more relevance to the time.
Mm-hmm. You let me buy a car for $600, sure, I'll crank start it, whatever.
Yeah, flat out.
The architecture there is absolutely amazing, and I think stands unique in Metro Detroit in a lot of ways because the neighborhood has persevered so strongly through the ups and downs of the city.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One, it's always been there. It's always had a bunch of people who loved living there. You know, there was always stories that, well, everybody moved to Grosse Pointe at a certain point. That's not true. People would move back and forth between Grosse Pointe and Indian Village, depending on their life circumstances as they downsize or whatever.
And there would be a lot of connections between the two of them.
Yes.
And I know that socially as well, just from my own family experience.
Yeah. So, of course, as the city had its problems, particularly post-World War II, that's probably where some of the issues came in. Some of the grand old houses were turned into rooming houses, especially during the housing shortages of World War II. And that's the kind of thing that the Indian Village Association got banded together, actually starting in the late 30s, to protect the neighborhood because people loved the place. They loved the houses, of course, but they loved their neighbors too. It's always been a neighborly place. So we are strictly R1 residential zoning, no more rooming houses, and that has kept the neighborhood intact, whereas other places that didn't have that protection unfortunately got a lot of really bad development in the 50s and 60s that's permanent, unfortunately.
Well, and that R1 you can't do everywhere in the city, obviously.
No.
Like in the North End, we're R3.
Yes.
But that's intentional because the North End developed as a different kind of area.
Yeah.
But still has some amazing houses.
Yes.
Well, when it comes to Indian Village, there's just so much character to so many things. And I think that like one of the things that strikes me about Indian Village when I go back to it is it's, to be honest, romantic. Like there's a romance to Indian Village that other neighborhoods just don't have.
Part of the thing that helped it was each house was an individual construction. It was an individual owner hiring a separate architect to do a house to their wants and desires. So there's no typical house, maybe a little bit for the times. You get some of the Georgian colonials of brick are more common, but it's eclectic. It's all sorts of houses in all sorts of styles. So it's visually exciting just to walk around and look at all the differences and the details.
And it stands out among some of the higher end neighborhoods of Detroit because like the University District, I love the University District, but in fact, it's kind of a prototype for the modern suburban home in that a lot of the stuff, it's cool, it's got turrets and everything. But if you look closer, and I have a lot of friends up there, their homes are actually just rotated versions, like out of different things that you could pick. That in fact, University District was kind of the beginning of what you might see in a Northville or something like that today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I'm more so interested when it comes to Indian Village is sort of the future of the neighborhood, right? Because one thing that, at least as a Detroiter growing up here, Indian Village was the old money. Mm-hmm. It was the folks who had been there, and some of the people who had been there were still there when I had reached adulthood. But now a lot of those people are leaving their homes to family members or potentially even just moving out, or people are buying. What are you seeing kind of in the neighborhood that maybe bodes for the future? What types of people are you seeing moving into the neighborhood that weren't there before, or is it kind of the same folks?
No, the big change is children, little children all over the place have something like 20% of the neighborhood has turned over since the start of the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
That's huge.
That's huge.
And almost all of the newcomers are couples with small children, and they're looking to say, this is going to be our forever house. We're going to raise our family in this nice big house. I don't have to move again because no matter how big or whatever the family gets, we've got space. And frankly, there's nothing more fun for a little kid to be wandering around a place with back stairs and secret rooms and all that kind of stuff. So definitely that is the change. You're getting all sorts of, there's always going to be the sweat equity specials that people have bought because they're needing a little work or a lot of work.
My grandmother would literally call it the Indian Village renovation because so many of her friends would be working on a room, like working on it room by room and putting up a sheet of plastic.
Yes, that happens. Well, my last house had 21 rooms, so it's like there's always a couple you shut the door on.
Excuse me.
You broke Norris.
So like, what do you even do with that many rooms? Like,
well, that's why I sold the house. It was kind of like just cleaning.
Norris wants to be your friend. This is what we're hearing.
Yeah, what do you even do? Like, you have a sitting room, a smoking room, a TV room,
you have a billiards room. You have a ballroom. That's very common in the area. I had a billiards table on my third floor, and I could see the Detroit River.
But that's just the basement. The billiards room is just the basement where I grew up. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's part of the appeal. Is these houses are just unique, and they're within reach of mere mortals. So people, that's one of the reasons I think you get somewhat attached to the neighborhood, is because you can't find this in most places. And then, of course, you start meeting your neighbors, and there's lots of places to eat and places, bars, etc. in the neighborhood. But you have so many people with all these wonderful gourmet kitchens. So you're going out as you walk over to somebody's house to have dinner and cocktails.
That was how I grew up. So my grandmother would always be at brunch once a month.
Okay.
And it would always be rotating between houses, and I would always have to do stuff. And so a story I will share is that she was over at a friend's house, and she was extremely offended, apparently, that they were serving. And this, of course, there were a few cocktails in. I was a young child. I did not realize what cocktails did to you. And there were a few cocktails in, and they were talking about how serving tea in paper cups is uncivilized. And so she made me go. Yeah, and so exactly. So we went back to her house, and it should be telling that I pulled a radio flyer wagon as opposed to driving the car. I didn't know this at the time, right? Full of china back to the house to where we were at and reserve tea. And that was, I mean, obviously it was a gag and it was to be funny, but it was like to show that community that she was there every brunch. Like that was a big deal for her.
I have a similar story with my house. A retired city magistrate, we were having our Indian Village yard sales once or twice a year. Everybody brings out all the stuff from the attic and the basement.
They're great to go to, by the way, if you have not gone.
And I knew this Ms. McDuffie, and she looked at my house and says, "This house was the first place I ever got drunk." The parents had a cocktail party the night before in the basement rec room, has a fireplace, all that. And of course, they were sleeping off the effects of their party when Ms. McDuffie and her girlfriends went down to the basement and sampled all the leftover booze and got a little carried away with it. So, and that's a kind of a classic Indian Village situation. But
you know, one of the things you mentioned earlier, to circle back to something you said that I really loved, is to see children moving back into the city. That's a huge thing in general, but also for these homes, because these homes are meant to have people in them.
Yes.
And families in them. Like, it does get lonely if you're going to be in a 21-room house, but you're by yourself, right? These homes are for energy, you know, and that's how they stay alive, because buildings aren't alive unless they have people in them.
absolutely. And the neighborhood isn't alive unless you've got families and people out walking their dogs, and all, you know, you sit there and find you get a dog, of course, that helps.
Yeah.
Wander
Well, I
around
sometimes
and
actually
talk to
crash your
people.
neighborhood with my dog.
Okay, well,
Just for fun.
Maybe you'll meet mine someday too. But that's sort of the typical, evening. Talk to your neighbors as they're wandering around with Hugo or Fido doing the thing. So it's part of the social network that makes this pretty cool, because you all have a common interest of keeping these monsters up and maintained. And whose plumber are you getting your work done by?
Well, and it's such a journey, because so like one of our sponsors, and I'll throw the shameless plug here, Best Choice Roofing. It's so important to have contractors that actually are going to work in the city. And it sounds silly, but there's actually like a whole niche of contractors that that specialize in the city, because the needs are different. Like, these houses have crazy angles on their roofs and plumbing and gutters. And my uncle was a window washer, and we go wash some windows. You have, like, these are things that are like unique to these. It's almost like you're taking care of art pieces.
One of the things that the neighborhood has is, we call them a hack party, HACK, for Historic Area Cocktail Club. Don't ask how they spelled it, but one of the oftentimes items of discussion is, I need an electrician, or I need a wet plaster person. You talk around your neighbors. It's like, anybody got one that they like? Especially prior to the internet, this was the only way you got referrals that were accurate and quality people. So, and that, of course, those hack parties, they've been going on since the early 80s, I believe.
I remember being a kid going to a Harvey Wallbanger party.
Oh, that's a little before my time.
And they the part of it was you drank Harvey Wallbangers and you banged walls down with your neighbors.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
My eyes are being opened to a whole separate world of Detroit. This is so fascinating.
And it all was there the whole time.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like, it's funny with like the whole thing with Michigan Central and whatever. We talk about like grit and all these things, and all those things exist in Detroit. But Detroit was also grand. It is grand in so many ways.
I agree. One thing that I also want to ask is, is there areas where people can come and see some of these homes? Let's talk about that a little bit.
This is the big one. Yeah. This weekend, June 8th and 9th, is the 48th Indian Village Home and Garden Tour. And there are 6 houses. Interesting enough, it's number 48 for tour. 4 of the houses have never been on tour before. So it's a pretty unique, you got to see. And 4 of them, not the same 4, have all had extensive fire damage at some point in their lives and been meticulously restored by their owners. And I must say, I know the houses. These houses are in great shape. The poster child, not necessarily for the tour, but for fire, is the one on Seminole that literally the boiler caught fire because nobody was in the house, burned a huge portion of the house. Thought it was going to be a goner, but after some false starts with other people, this local guy picked it up, and he has restored it to the nines. It had been stucco coated, which was the fashion, I guess, after the turn of the century. It was a wood house. He removed 30 tons of stucco.
Whoa.
To restore the original siding and its original appearance, as well as all the fire damage and all. Might be a little bit more than typical, but that's one of the reasons you want to see these houses. They're just works of art. People, one neighbor who was on tour this year, the house is full of art. That's kind of their calling card for being on tour. Just amazing amounts of arts. There's a couple of gardens that are part of it. You got to see these, and you only get one chance. Especially if 4 of them have never been on tour before. You better see them now because it might be another decade or 2 before they repeat.
Yeah. So let's talk about the logistics of this tour and how people get into it. How does this work?
You can buy tickets up until Friday on historicindianvillage.org, basically a PayPal type credit card thing, or you can buy them on the day of tour in person, cash credit card at the Jefferson Avenue Presbyterian Church, which is right across the street from Irma Henderson Park and the Whittier. And you can park in the Whittier parking lot or the church parking lot.
So is this like a walking tour? Are there shuttle buses? Let's talk about that whole thing, like how it goes out.
You can walk. We do have shuttle buses that will take you around because it's a mile from one end of the neighborhood to the other, from Jefferson to Mac. So there are 2 shuttle buses running around continuously, but it's only supposed to be like partly cloudy, maybe 75 degrees. Part of the fun is just walking around as well as going through the houses and seeing, the trees are out, the gardens are blooming. And since the weather's going to be perfect,
okay,
it's definitely part of the deal. But yes, if you don't feel like walking or if you've done it enough, just hop right outside the house. The buses stop right in front of each house, as well as our Centennial Garden and the ticket locations. So it's easy peasy, as they say.
I know what the next question is going to be. Are there drinks?
We have food trucks.
Okay.
At the Centennial Garden. Michigan's alcohol laws definitely, we're trying at some point to get a beer garden, but there's a lot of work you got to do to that.
Oh, yeah.
However, there are, in West Village, just right by, there's a couple of cocktail places. But definitely you can get non-alcoholic drinks and food at the Centennial Garden. Also, one of the other churches has lunches as well. So
my grandmother loved the Centennial Garden so much, so I'm so glad to see it being used still.
Yes, it is still used. We just had a neighborhood cleanup, spruce up. I think they've finally taken the dumpster away. The city helped us out with. So yes, neighbors are still taking care of it, and it looks nice.
That is awesome. So again, if people want to learn more, they want to get involved in this, I actually plan on going out this weekend.
Okay, great.
Because I cannot wait. I have not been to the tour in a few years.
Oh.
So, because I try to rotate around them. So like I've done the University District tour recently and stuff like that. So I'm really glad to be back. If people want to know more, sign up. Where can they go?
historicindianvillage.org. Or like I say, show up on Saturday morning at the Jefferson Presbyterian Church and get your tickets and you'll be off.
Well, Mark Reynolds, the chairperson of the 2024 Indian Village Home Tour, thank you so much for your time on Daily Detroit. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
All right, and we are done for today. Thank you so much for listening to your Daily Detroit. I am Jer Stays.
And I'm Norris Howard.
Remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you around Detroit.